contemporary politico-diplomatic aspects of NSG membership, uh, NSG expansion. We are delighted to have a very distinguished panel of speakers for today's discussion. Now let me introduce you to our worthy speakers. Our first speaker, Ms. Ahyousha Khan. She is currently working as a senior research associate at the SVI. She has been associated with the SVI since 2017. She holds an MPhil degree in Defense and Strategic Studies from Qaeda University, Islamabad, and a BS degree in Defense and Diplomatic Studies from Fatma Jinnah Women University, Rawalpindi. She has authored a chapter on peaceful use of nuclear technology and Article 4 of the NPT in the SVI's upcoming book, Problems and Prospects of the Non-Proliferation Regime, Pakistani Perspectives. She has presented on the topic of nuclear doctrines in South Asia at the SVI one-day capacity building workshop on nuclear doctrine, non-proliferation and static stability in South Asia back in 2018. She has also authored a research paper on MIRV and BMDs, nuclear deterrence in South Asia, in the Journal of Security and Strategic Analysis. Her areas of interest are nuclear deterrence, non-proliferation, nuclear doctrines, and emerging new technologies. She has been contributing in her areas of interest in newspapers, international blogs, workshops, journals, and books. Today, she will present a short primer on the contemporary politico-diplomatic aspects of NSG expansion. Our next speaker, Ambassador Retired Tariq Osman Hyder. He has served as Additional Secretary at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Pakistan, and also Pakistan's Ambassador to Turkmenistan and South Korea. As Additional Secretary UNEC, he participated in UN Security Council Resolution 1540 negotiations policy process. During the India-Pakistan peace dialogue from 2004 to 2007, he led Pakistan's delegation for the 3 separate expert-level talks on nuclear CBMs, conventional CBMs, and the joint anti-terrorism mechanism. He was part of the negotiations that led to setting up of the hotline between the foreign secretaries in 2004, the ballistic missile flight testing pre-notification agreement of 2005, and the bilateral agreement on reducing the risk from accidents relating to nuclear weapons of February 2007. He also took part in the formulation of Pakistan's Strategic Export Control Division (SECDIV) at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Today, he will present his views on dynamics of NSC expansion through criteria-based approach and analysis. Our next speaker, Dr. Rizwana Abbasi. She is currently serving as Associate Professor and Head of the Department of International Relations and Peace and Conflict Studies at the National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad. Previously, she has worked as an Associate Professor in the Departments of International Relations and Strategic Studies at the National Defense University, Islamabad, and also Associate Professor in the Department of International Relations at Bahria University, Islamabad. Dr. Abbasi received her PhD from University of Leicester, UK, specializing in international security and nuclear non-proliferation. Previously, she was a postdoctoral research fellow and has taught at the University of Leicester. Dr. Abbasi is a former visiting fellow of Stimson Center, Washington, and a research fellow at the University of Leeds, UK. She has written three books. Her latest book, entitled Building a Road to Nuclear Disarmament, Bridging the Gap Between Competing Approaches. It is recently published by Routledge. Her co-authored book titled Nuclear Deterrence in South Asia, New Technologies and Future Challenges to Sustainable Peace. It was published by Routledge in 2019. She has also authored Pakistan and New Nuclear Taboo, Regional Deterrence and International Arms Control Regime, which was published by Peter Lang in 2012. Today, she will be speaking on NSG membership and country-specific approach, implications for South Asian strategic stability. Our last speaker for today's webinar is Dr. Tariq Rauf. He was Head of Verification and Security Policy Coordination at the International Atomic Energy Agency, the office reporting to the Director General, the point of contact and liaison to Zanger Committee, the Nuclear Supply Group, UN Security Council Resolution 1540 Committee, and the UN Counterterrorism International Task Force, the Scientific Secretary of the IAEA International Expert Group on Multilateral Approaches to the Nuclear Fuel Cycle, and the Coordinator of IAEA Multilateral Approaches to the Nuclear Fuel Cycle, including the IAEA Low Enriched Uranium Reserve and Low Enriched Uranium Bank of Osman, Kazakhstan. He will be speaking on a global multilateral export control mechanism, implications for India and the NSG. His comments today are in his personal capacity. Before we proceed further, I would like to mention that this webinar will be conducted in the form of a panel discussion during which each speaker will be given 15 minutes. I request all the worthy speakers to kindly follow this timeline. If anyone is having trouble hearing or viewing the webinar or is having any form of connectivity issues, please do mention this in the chat and we shall try our best to address these issues from our end. Kindly note that by default, mics of all the attendees will be on mute and only panelists will be allowed to use mic and video. If anyone from the audience would like to ask a question, they are requested to kindly use the question and answers option to type out their question. Please do include your name as well as your organizational affiliation along with your question. The questions will then be presented to our panel by the moderator during the question and answer session accordingly. While we fully encourage you to participate, we request you to kindly to please be brief in your question. We shall try our best to that all questions get answered within our allotted time. Please further note that all the opinions voiced at the SVI webinar are solely opinions and do not constitute any activity that will be reported in media. This session is being live streamed on Facebook page and website of the SVI. The full recording of the webinar will be available on the official website and YouTube channel of the SVI as well. If anyone would like to tag or post screen grabs of this event on their personal blogs, web pages, or social media, please do not forget to mention that the webinar was organized by the SVI. Thank you very much. Now I invite Dr. Zafar Iqbal Cheema to give his welcome and introductory remarks. Over to you, Dr. Cheema.
Thank you, Haras. Thank you very much for a very generous introduction to all the distinguished speakers. As we all know that this is a continuous series of the SVI webinars, which we hold almost every month. And I am first of all very fondly grateful all the 4 and 5 speakers, including Haras, for finding their time out of their very busy schedules and the very distinguished, outstanding panel of experts which have been available to us to speak on this webinar, the contemporary political diplomatic aspects of the nuclear suppliers job. I don't have to speak anything. There are so many distinguished speakers, and there's a primer by Ahyousha Khan as well. But I will just briefly say that the nuclear supplier group is becoming a history. The applications of India and Pakistan are now dormant. There is no lively discussion or contemporary discussion on the subject. In the last 2 years, in fact, the whole nuclear supplier group seems to gone in a slow mode. There no 30th plenary has not been held, and we are not sure whether the 31st plenary will be held in not in the current Brussels, Belgium presidentship of the nuclear suppliers group. Nuclear suppliers group works in a very different way. It's not an international treaty of the government. It's basically is a cartel of the participating governments, which has certain guidelines, and those guidelines are intended to so-called stop the spread of nuclear weapons. How far that is done, the policies of the nuclear suppliers group are contentious. They are being looked upon by 2 different groups very differently. There's one group of countries which prescribes a merit-based policy, a merit-based, or it can also be called a country-specific policy. That is the supporters of India, particularly the United States of America and the Western countries and the American allies, are in support of a country-specific approach to membership of the nuclear suppliers group. The country-specific approach says that a country has the merit-based policy that is a member of the non-proliferation institutions like Webinar arrangements, Australia Group, MTCR, and other such thing, and therefore it has better credentials to be a member of the. And then they do not want Pakistan to be lumped together along with this merit-based country-specific approach, and they are probably against Pakistan's membership. Pakistan's point of view, which is championed by People Republic of China, on the other hand, is a criteria-based approach that there should be a fixed criteria, political legal criteria which a country should fulfill, and only then aspire to be a member of the nuclear suppliers group. The criteria is that it should have an export control strategic regime, it should have a nuclear regulatory authority, it should have a nuclear safety and security credentials strong as compared with other groups. And that's kind of a criteria which Ayusha will dilate that largely on that. So these are the two contentious policies, the policies which are followed by two different groups. And there is deadlock or a stalemate in the politics of the nuclear suppliers group since 2016, when in May 2016, India and Pakistan filed applications for the membership of the. There are certain guidelines which the NSG has issued. Those guidelines are not very universally applicable to all the member states. Some of them are controversial. An attempt was made previously by what is known as a Grassi formula, that they adopt a Grassi formula, which was basically a discriminatory formula which was favoring India to become a member of the nuclear suppliers group, and it was against Pakistan. There are certain features of the Grassi formula, which I'm sure Ayusha would explain. But one of it is that the separation of civilian and military nuclear facilities of the countries. It should have an additional protocol of safeguards to be signed, and so on and so forth. This is a Grassi formula. The nuclear suppliers group works by plenary, which is held once in a year, and the last plenary was held on 29th, perhaps was in Kazakhstan. After that, we have not heard whether the 30th plenary has been held or not, and there is no such information definite about the 31st plenary, whether it is going to be held or not going to be held in Brussels. There is a consultative group of the nuclear suppliers group, which advises the plenary and the chairman of the nuclear supplier group on various activities of it, and it works out the policy of the city. So with that very brief introduction, I will not go and preempt the presentations of the distinguished panelists which are going to speak on this very subject. So I will hand back to Haris to kindly request the speakers one by one to speak on their subject. So it's back to you, Haris. Thank you very much. I'm once more very grateful to distinguished panelists that they have agreed find time out of their very busy schedule to be a part of the SVI webinar. So thank you very much, all of you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. Cheema, for your very kind introductory and welcome remarks. Now I invite Ms. Ayusha Khan to present a short primer on the subject matter. Over to you, Ms. Ayusha.
Thank you, Haris. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good morning. I will be giving the primer on the political contemporary diplomatic aspects of NSG expansion. I will be starting with a brief history, introduction, guidelines of the NSG, and they will briefly cover the NSG current debate. Rest, I will leave the analysis to the experts on the topic, which are invited today in our panel. I'll be sharing my slides with you. I will share the screen with you quickly. Thank you so much for being with me. The primary contemporary political-diplomatic aspects of the NSG expansion. If we go into the history of it, when after the Non-Proliferation Treaty was negotiated in 1968, it granted the non-nuclear weapon states access to nuclear materials and technology for strictly peaceful purposes. Recognizing thus that peaceful nuclear programs could turn into the weapons program, several NPT nuclear supplier states sought to determine the conditions for sharing specific equipments and materials with non-nuclear weapon states. Thus, in 1971, these supplier states formed the Zenger Committee in order to require states outside the NPT to institute International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards before importing certain items that could be used to pursue nuclear weapons. In 1974, these technologies which led to the development of under the guise of peaceful purposes could be diverted to build weapons. Thus, NSG was established in 1975 in response to. I'm sorry, I'm facing a little bit of technical issue here, please. Thus, NSG was established in 1975 in response to India's nuclear tests, the so-called peaceful nuclear explosion of 1974. In response to India's action, several Zagreb committee members, along with France, who was not a member of the NPT at that time, established the NSG to further regulate nuclear-related exports. The NSG also added supplemental technologies to the original Zagreb committee's trigger list, becoming part one of the NSG guidelines. In addition, NSG members agreed to apply their trade restriction to all states, not just those outside the NPT. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Or my slides are moving ahead with in front of you or not? Tariq?
Yes, we can hear you, but your slides are still, they are not moving.
Ahyousha, please click on the screen, then move next.
Thank you so much. A nuclear supply group. Today, it is a voluntary group. It is comprised of 48 member states, which agreed to coordinate their export control to non-nuclear weapon states, which are parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The NSG governs the transfer of civilian nuclear materials and material-related equipments and technologies. In order to ensure that their nuclear imports are not used to develop weapons, NSG members are expected to forego nuclear trade with governments that do not subject themselves to the confidence-building international measures and expansions. To control these imports and exports, NSG now has the two sets of guidelines listing the specific nuclear materials, equipments, and technologies that are subjected to export controls. The guidelines are comprised of two parts, each created in response to significant proliferation event that highlighted shortcomings in the export control system. Part 1 guidelines list materials and technologies designed specifically for nuclear use, and Part 2 guidelines identifies dual-use goods, non-nuclear items with legitimate civilian applications that can also be used to develop weapons. These guidelines are important for the submission for nuclear technology, but states ultimately decide or proceed with their transactions according to their political calculations that could also lead to the violation of the guidelines. These political calculations and interest is that are creating issues for extending membership of NSG today. If we go for the current debate of the NSG, its genesis was can be located in the when India-US gave their joint statement in 18 July 2005, which argued that as a responsible nuclear weapon power, India should acquire same benefits and advantages as the other nuclear states. And to achieve this partnership, US adjusted its domestic laws and policies in addition to working with its friends and allies to adjust international regimes to enable full civilian nuclear energy cooperation and trade with India. India was granted exemption from the NSG export control guidelines in 2008, but it insisted on equal membership in all the 4 export control regimes, including the NSG. The US waiver allowed India to conduct its nuclear trade with several countries such as France, Russia, South Korea, Japan, Canada, Australia, and few others. After the NSG exemption, formal membership of the group is not likely to add any additional benefit other than the recognition of the fact of India's nuclear status. In November 2010, during his visit to India, President Obama announced that US would support India's full membership in the export control regimes, including NSG, the Missile Technology Control Regime, MTCR, the Australia Group, and Vesnar arrangement. Today, India is the member of 3 export control regimes, MTCR, Australia Group, and Vesnar arrangement, except NSG. This This was an attempt to raise India's stature as a responsible nuclear power while simultaneously working to dehyphenate the India-Pakistan security equation. To advocate India's case for membership in the NSG, the US also circulated a draft paper in 2011, which resulted in strong rebuttal by several countries. The US subsequently challenged the arguments presented by those countries, and the whole scenario led to the debate on the relationship between the NSG and the NPT, and the consequences of admitting non-NPT states in the group. It raises many questions, such as under what circumstances non-NPT nuclear state or power should be accepted into the regime, because these non-NPT nuclear powers and producers and holders of are also producers and holders of nuclear-related technology. Generally, for NSG membership, any state that conducts export appearing on the guidelines may apply for the NSG membership. A potential member is evaluated on its proliferation report for national export controls and adherence to the international non-proliferation treaties and agreements. All existing members must approve an applicant for admittance to the regime. But the most important condition is that participating governments has to be signatory of either of the NPT or the nuclear weapon-free zone. The NSG member seems to be divided on the issue of the non-NPT states membership into the group, mainly on political grounds. However, a brief review of India-Pakistan's non-proliferation credentials reveals that it could be difficult for NSG countries to make the distinction between the applicants of the two non-NPT states with compatible credentials. In May 2016, both India and Pakistan formally applied for the NSG membership, which made it difficult for the NSG members to consider one of the non-NPT states while ignoring the other. So to break the impasse that was created due to strong and diverging positions taken by several countries, the NSG chair at that time from South Korea appointed Ambassador Rafael Grossi of Argentina as a facilitator to develop a consensus for the non-NPT states membership. After consultation with the US and other proponents of India's specific approach, Ambassador Grossi came up with a 9-point formula that was based on the step that India has already completed as a part of its commitment under the India-US nuclear deal. And therefore, the Grossi points seem tailored to address India's NSG application while keeping Pakistan on the indefinite hold. And Ambassador Grossi formulas completed outskirted the fundamental issue of the non-NPT states membership into the regime. As a result, 3 different views on the criteria within the NSG participating governments and internationally emerged. The first group insisted on a strict criteria which would include adherence to the CTBT, FMCT, additional protocol, separation of facilities before consideration for the membership. The second group suggested that this perhaps may be too stringent, as the political consideration of these norms would be a lot for the countries at a time. So they proposed a sort of phased approach where some commitments would be immediate and more stringent commitments would follow. And the third group was focused on the fulfillment of the technical and political and legal aspects before moving to the next step of developing its criteria for non-NPT states. However, if we come to the conclusion of it, the things are rather political. The criteria alone does not present a clear picture on whether Pakistan should or would be admitted to the NSG. The judgment is that at the end of the day, political rather than technical, so the debate also becomes more political in nature. If, however, the NSG is able to evolve a non-discriminatory criteria, this could be one step toward mitigating a long-standing problem of lack of universalization in the global non-proliferation regime. Thank you so much. This is from us.
Thank you, Ahyousha.
Thank you so much, Ahyousha, for a very comprehensive presentation. Now I invite Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder to present his views on dynamics of NSC expansion through criteria-based approach and analysis. Over to you, Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder.
Thank you very much. I think before I start, I would just like to hark back to something that I wrote in the International Herald Tribune in February of 1979, where I said that if the oil-producing countries had put forward a similar kind of organization which said that oil will only be exported to countries who accept the OPEC's control over all refineries and prevail, provided that the resulting distillate is covered by international safeguards against misuse like war, etc. What would happen to that? And I think I also said that if the NSG prevails without any limitation up to the age of breeders, it will make OPEC look like a pack of Boy Scouts next to the mafia. Well, that was in 1979. So things have moved ahead since then. Maybe not all for the better. But while I will, of course, deal with this question of the criteria-based approach, I would like to look at it from the point of view of Pakistan from 5 different questions, fundamental questions. First of all, what are the various approaches, which have been dealt with somewhat by the previous speaker and no doubt with the others. Secondly, how does the criteria-based approach fit in and who supports us? That's for us important. Thirdly, since it's the most equitable and therefore best for us, what is its status in terms of our application and that of India? And fourthly, which I think is also some relevance, if not the most, how best can we pursue it within the NSG, with its members and outside? And my conclusion at the end, I think I will try and focus on this part most of all. Well, the NSG membership, who are the members, etc., you've dealt with. India-specific waiver has also been there, and it was to formalize the US-India deal. Then in 2008, to get the agreement with the IAEA, which unfortunately at that time we strongly should have opposed, and we had our ambassadors in Geneva and New York who did so, but they were overruled at the political level and forced to withdraw that, which was a great mistake because there were a number of countries who were hesitant or didn't approve of the IAEA, the US-sponsored IAEA-backed IAEA agreement between the IAEA and India, and they would have not stayed at the sidelines at that point. But anyhow, what is done is done. So there had been discussions before the Indian application as to what would be done with the other countries who were non-nuclear nuclear powers but outside the NPT. And the Indian application forced the pace of development, and Pakistan followed suit within a few days, and to ensure a simultaneous consideration of both applications, given the non-NPT status of both countries. Contrary to US and Indian expectations, the debate within the NSG around membership for non-NPT states was has been drawn out and characterized by divided opinion. There are 3 basic categories which have been dealt with by both Professor Cheema and by Ahyousha, but I'll just elaborate a little bit. The group led by the USA and other countries which support Indian membership for commercial and political reasons. This group regards the 2008 NSG waiver and commitments undertaken by India at the time as sufficient conditions for its full membership. It does not see India's non-NPT status as posing any insurmountable problem. Pakistan, on the other hand, is often seen as not fulfilling these conditions by these countries. Unqualified support for India would be US, UK, France, Australia, and Poland. Then the second group, qualified support for India. These countries are supportive of the Indian membership in principle, but would like to see it taking additional non-proliferation commitments, that, for instance, signing the CTBTO in order to become eligible for membership. They believe that while there should be objective criteria in place, each membership application has to be evaluated on its own merit. So for this, the qualified support, I would count Spain, Argentina, to a large extent, Belgium, Mexico, Switzerland. Then there are the third group of countries, the criteria-based approach, which regard the NPT as the cornerstone of the global non-proliferation regime and would like the NSG to adopt new criteria certain non-proliferation commitments which the non-NPT applicants must undertake to make up for their non-NPT status to govern their membership of their membership. While there are different shades of opinion within this group, it is led by China, which has taken a firm position that NSG membership of non-NPT states poses certain technical, legal, and political questions, which must be thoroughly discussed within the group in a transparent intergovernmental process. It calls for a two-step approach whereby the NSG would come up with a non-discriminatory criteria, which would be uniformly applicable to all applications, and then would move on to the second stage where individual applications are evaluated in accordance with the laid down criteria. Within this group are New Zealand, Ireland, Turkey, China, and Italy. And within this particular grouping, only China and Turkey have openly called for simultaneous consideration of the membership application by Pakistan and India. There's certain other countries, just for interest's sake, Brazil was very vocally initially in the criteria-based approach. They dialed down their position later, but never supported India. Argentina was a bit more neutral and focused on processes because they had the chair. As well, it remained open to the idea of non-NPT countries being admitted. So basically for us, the implication of India and for everybody else is that for us, the most thing is that if India were to be brought in, as is well known, because of the consensus rule, Pakistan would find the possibility of its entry permanently foreclosed because of the consensus rule. And it would also entail serious consequences for strategic restraint and stability in South Asia. Now, the NSG membership applications of these countries have focused attention on what criteria for admission should they be in the export control regime. At the heart of the debate is the NSG document entitled Procedural Arrangements, which stipulates NPT is one of the factors for participation of any state in the nuclear suppliers group. The debate has been revolving around the question of criteria which non-NPT states would meet with the view to establishing NPT equivalence. And it's been oscillating between two extremes. On the one hand, there's a view that non-NPT states should be admitted unless it accedes to the treaty as a nuclear weapon state, so meaning that you have to accept the NPT. On the other hand, India and its supporters assert that the commitments undertaken by India and subsequent IAEA safeguards, protocol agreement, etc., sufficient conditions. The NSG procedural arrangement document lists certain factors for consideration of NSG membership for any new entrants. These include: one, establishment and implementation of legally based export control regime, adherence to NSG guidelines; thirdly, capability to supply items on the NSG control list; fourthly, commitment to non-proliferation; fifthly, accession to the NPT and the non-weapon-free zone treaty. So apart from the last, number 5, accession to NPT and the nuclear weapon-free zone treaties, certainly we fulfill. India and Pakistan don't fulfill the last one, but they more or less fulfill the others. And certainly Pakistan has a legally based export control regime. It adheres to the NSG guidelines. It is very much capable of supplying items on the NSG control list. And if you look at the 48 members of the NSG, Pakistan has a greater capability than 2/3 of them. And some of them, in fact, are just transit states. So I think we certainly have an element we have a very strong case. It'll be good for us, it'll be good for the NSG if we're in it. There was an argument made earlier by the Americans for India. It's better to have India in the tent than outside. And in terms of Pakistan, it's true. The difference is that as far as India is concerned, its agreement with the IAEA, and then the additional protocol, have so many loopholes in it that, I mean, for a start, they're keeping 8 heavy water reactor safeguards, which are ideal for making for dedicated facilities. Outside safeguards, it's enough to make 275 nuclear weapons a year. Then you have breeder reactors, for some reason, I mean, have also been allowed outside safeguards, and they could make even more nuclear weapons. And the Indians have said anything they consider strategic, they will keep outside safeguards and outside the civil program. Whereas Pakistan has said that all its power reactors, of course, are in safeguards, and we intend that all future safeguards should also be in safeguards. And we now have the ability to make not very large, but at least 300 megawatt reactors ourselves, and certainly research reactors as well. And we can certainly even export research reactors if we like, and there are other things as well. And then there are things like energy security, and certainly we are much more fossil fuel dependent than India. And in terms of climate change, again, we have a much better, well, India and Pakistan, and both have got good grounds for coming under the climate change, etc. So I think we have, if you look at our credentials, Pakistan's credentials are very good. Our separation plan would be much better than the Indians, not keep things outside safeguards, apart from our dedicated facilities. And then if one looks at the commitments made by India under their agreement with the IAEA and the joint statement, the separation has not been fully implemented. Fast breeder reactors and fast fuel reactor are outside safeguards. Question of voluntary place civilian facilities under IAEA safeguards, riddled with exceptions on the Indians' part, and safeguarded material can be used in unsafeguarded facilities, can substitute safeguarded for unsafeguarded material. And the IAEA protocol, which they are meant to have signed, they have signed with the IAEA, contrary to the commitments of the additional protocol, it only applies to nuclear exports from India. It does not apply to nuclear material facilities or equipment in India. And regarding the unilateral moratorium and nuclear testing, there's no change in Indian opposition to CTBT and refused to sign. Pakistan, as you know, is an observer at the CTBT, and we voted in favor of it. And when you look at the refrain from enrichment and reprocessing to states which do not have them and support international efforts to limit their spread, India's export control guidelines do not specifically prohibit transfer of these technologies. And in fact, they do allow it under 206 legislation, and it falls short of the bilateral commitment to the US and current NSG practice. And its export control guidelines do not fully correspond to the NSG practices on export of enrichment or reprocessing technology, and India does not accept the NSG decision on NPT requirements for ENR transfer. So there are a number of factors which, again, where Indians are deficient, exceptions in the safeguards agreement and their implications, incomplete separation, use of safeguarded material in unsafeguarded facilities, use of safeguarded material with unsafeguarded material, substitution, exemption from safeguards. It allows special fissionable material, plutonium produced through use of safeguarded material, to be exempted from safeguards, surprisingly. And in reactors in which the proportion of safeguarded material is less than 30%. So these exceptions in the Indian Safeguards Agreement are unique, which are not even applicable to the nuclear weapon states and their Safeguards Agreement. And there are a number of proliferation implications in the exceptions in the Indian Safeguards Agreement. So I think in terms of India, we could say that despite their claims and their 2005 commitments, the 2006 separation plans, and the 2009 IAEA agreement and additional protocol, it does not provide any proliferation benefits. To the contrary, the continued link between Indian civilian and military nuclear facilities and exceptions to safeguards agreement provided an opportunity to use
Sir, please wind up.
Okay, so what I would like to say in my conclusion is, how can we broaden this thing from beyond the NSG? So the exclusive closed universe of the NSG, well, there are far out ideas at WTO, ICJ, and then there are more practical ideas, press for a universal export control regime, which Tariq, Rauf will certainly cover. And but what I would add, which was very important, so that to safeguard developing countries from the increasing restrictions on dual use items essential for their development, AI for one. But what I would like to end my final conclusion is that, look, we have very bad negotiators. There have been a lot of discussion on our talks with the Americans and others on Afghanistan. I don't mean about bases. What I mean is, how can we help on Afghanistan? But what I never see reflected in all these discussions in the media and the press, and as far as I know in government things, is the NSG. I mean, Prime Minister said you should treat us equally. Obviously, you can't. We have different things vis-a-vis China that will be treated exactly equally. We couldn't give the same commitments vis-a-vis China at all. But certainly on NSG should be a main condition that if you want help on Afghanistan, then we want to be treated equally with India on NSG. So that's the thought I'd leave you to, and I think that's the most important aspect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Tariq Osman, for a very comprehensive presentation. Now I invite our next speaker, Dr. Rizwana Karim Abbasi, to speak on NSG membership and country-specific approach, implications for South Asian strategic stability. Over to you, Dr. Rizwana Abbasi. Mustafa, please unmute Dr. Rizwana.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. So thank you, Haris. I just wanted to highlight that I'm grateful to SVI for inviting me to this webinar, particularly that is quite, I would say, relevant today. I would say that it is really ironic to highlight that India's so-called peaceful nuclear weapon program in 1974 was basically primary and driving motivation for the formation of NSC. As we all know, that a Canadian supplied reactor and US supplied heavy water contributed to generate plutonium for the Indian device, and which certainly then marked a early period of crisis for the nuclear non-proliferation regime and a dent on global non-proliferation norms. At the time of its creation, we all understand that NSG was given the responsibility of regulating the transfer of nuclear technology and to ensure the nuclear material is not diverted to facilities which are not safeguarded or are used in all nuclear explosive activities. Conversely, the fundamental problem with the construct of NSG remained that it lacked legitimacy and was built on a political dominated framework and construct from the outset. So NSG certainly we actually observed, that remained on low profile for a couple of decades. But the process of globalization in 1990s certainly led to create inter-regional connectivities, along with states' increased interdependence when regional economies got deeply connected with global economies. Thus, the NSG gradually became prominent in the wake of emerging economic powerhouses and technological evolutions internationally. Gradually, we also witnessed that global power shift to Asia, and arrival of 21st century brought Asia to the center stage of the world politics. So the rise of China certainly and emerging economic powerhouses and a growing population in Asia verify that developing countries in Asia struggle to maintain sustainable socio-economic development while simultaneously working to reduce carbon emission for environmental protection. So interstate connectivities, regional trade and business activities increased developing states' demands for nuclear energy at the same time. So this political shift also introduced a rise and decline of world powers and renewed confrontation and cooperation among states within and outside Asia. So India in this whole process became an important player to offset rising China and secure ground for outsiders to project their power in broader Asian region. So in this backdrop, India was certainly incentivized and mainstreamed in the global political order. So within that construct, thus, of course, biased preferences at some point, such as Indo-US nuclear deal was initiated that led to violate states' national and international obligations. So US offered a waiver to India in this backdrop, hence lifting age-old international nuclear trade restrictions, which were slapped upon India in the backdrop of its 1974 tests. So thus NSG marked the end of India's decade-long isolation from the nuclear mainstream and of the technological denial regime. So this way, India has been offered incentives and privileges that are enjoyed by NPT states, thereby connecting it to global economies and international, technological market. So India was certainly privileged and was incentivized in this context without getting it, international community incentivized India basically without getting it to freeze production of weapons-grade fissile material, sign the CTBT or FMCT, follow International Atomic Energy Agency's full scope safeguards, or adhere to restraint regime and or a meaningful arms control mechanism in broader Southern Asia. So this deal has certainly stimulated India's economic growth, thereby offering New Delhi a foundation for technological modernity and scientific competence and achieving domestic energy, independence and offering India domestic energy independence. So India took the plea of low, natural reserves of civil nuclear power generation to get access to international nuclear fuel market. So, however, it is expanding its, enrichment facilities in Chalakri and Austria. So this basically allows India to divert all of the domestic uranium to, weapon-grade weapon program. So India maintains that it needs enriched uranium for propulsion. However, the capacity of uranium enrichment India is developing is much beyond the naval propulsion needs, even if it were to, have 4 to 6 nuclear power submarines. So the excess, basically, enrichment capacity could potentially be for uranium for thermonuclear weapons, possibly. So Indian access to the nuclear market by virtue of NSG exemption has enabled India to, build up a huge uranium reserves. So question here arises, what are the safety and security measures being followed by India in respect of this, reserve? So why are the NSG countries not holding India to highest international security standards? So have they taken up the recent incident of illegal uranium sales in India with the Indian authorities? We truly do not know anything about this. So India is diversifying its delivery platforms and increasing their numbers. So it will accordingly require much more fissile material for warheads of these delivery systems. So it will therefore need the increased capacity for weapons-grade fissile material production. So this also means that it is actually the Indian nuclear program which should be the fastest growing in the world at present. So only in 2020, if you observe, India conducted nearly 20 missile tests, whereas in comparison, Pakistan tested only 4. So the modernization of nuclear platforms such as upgradation in weapon-grade fissile material stockpile, high technology hardware inductions, ballistic missiles and force structure, induction of course, ICBMs, SLBMs, and multiple independent re-entry vehicles, technologies and surveillance means such as ISR capabilities and Su-30 aircrafts, maritime-based, UAVs, cruise missiles, aircraft carriers, and global prompt strikes are certainly alarming developments in this particular region. So these arms modernization trends have certainly created dangerous risks of accidental war, miscalculations, problem of strategic instability in South Asia. So it is safe to argue that the special arrangements within the NSG have, number one, created, aggravated regional asymmetries. Secondly, minimize space for talks on arms control between regional rivals, thereby minimizing, or creating crisis of trust. And finally, destabilize say that there are many countries in the NSG which do not have any sizable nuclear program, yet they are, there since they are either transit or transshipment hubs. So on the other hand, Pakistan has a much more extensive, civil nuclear program. So Pakistan therefore qualifies more. So which we should maintain our, I would say that while we maintain, our interest in NSG membership, we should avoid any sort of desperation. So it's in the, I would say, interest of NSG to have Pakistan, in the group. We don't need to make compromises that are not in our security interest. So some countries such as France, they have proposed and insisted that there should be, a merit-based approach rather than criteria-based approach. However, even for merit-based consideration of the two applications, I would say there have to be some benchmarks. And these benchmarks have to be the same for each applicant rather than arbitrary. So hence, criteria has to be agreed upon. And I would be very pleased to preserve more time for interactive session and to take questions during the interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rizwana Abbasi, for your kind presentation. Now I invite our last speaker, Dr. Tariq Rauf. He will speak on a global multilateral export control mechanism, implications for Pakistan, India, and the NSG. Over to you, Dr. Tariq.
Thank you very much for asking me to join this distinguished panel. I very much enjoyed the three presentations that went before me. So the idea of nuclear export controls has been with us since the very beginning of the nuclear age, and it really applies to nuclear fuel cycle items, which is reactors, research and power reactors, as well as nuclear fuel cycle facilities such as enrichment and plutonium reprocessing. So today there are 440 nuclear power plants that continue to provide more than 10% of the world's electricity in 32 states. We have about 50 reactors that are currently under construction, equivalent to approximately 15% of current generating capacity. Pakistan's per capita energy consumption is around 600 kilowatt hours per year. This compares to about 1,600 kilowatt hours per year in OECD countries. According to the World Nuclear Association's database, currently Pakistan has 2,332 megawatts electric, or 2.3 gigawatt electric operating capacity, and 1,100 megawatts under construction. So as we all know, Pakistan has 6 operating nuclear reactors with a combined net capacity of 2.3 gigawatts electric. In 2019, nuclear generated 17% of the country's electricity. That is about 9.1 billion kilowatt hours. Pakistan has one Chinese Huang-1 or HPR 1000, also known as ACP 1000, Generation 3 unit operational and one under construction. In light of its inability to buy uranium on the open market, Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission has said that Pakistan has agreed with China's National Nuclear Corporation to provide lifetime enriched fuel supply for the reactors, which is specified as about 60 years. So in sum, Pakistan's sole nuclear power plant and fuel supplier remains China. In contrast, India's per capita energy consumption is stated to be about 900 kilowatt hours per year. It has 23 operable nuclear reactors with a net combined capacity of 6.9 gigawatts electric. It generated nearly 41 billion kilowatt hours of electricity in 2019, representing 3% of India's electricity generation. India's 19 domestically produced, operating, and 3 under construction pressurized heavy water reactors are illegal copies of the Canadian supplied CANDU nuclear power plants at Rajasthan, RAP-1 and RAP-2. In addition, India is constructing 2 Russian-designed light water reactors. These are VVER 1000s, as well as a prototype fast breeder reactor. Like Pakistan, India also has a sole supplier of nuclear power plants and fuel, which is Russia. As has already been discussed, following the Nuclear Supplies Group Agreement, which was achieved in September 2008, the scope for India for sourcing both reactors and fuel from suppliers in other countries has opened up. India now has civil cooperation agreements with Argentina, Australia, Canada, Czech Republic, France, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Namibia, Russia, South Korea, United Kingdom, and the United States. It also has a full nuclear cooperation agreement that was signed with Japan and also endorsed by Japan's Diet in 2017. And this would allow India to import Japanese nuclear technology and secures Japan's support for India to join the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Reports suggest that Russia will build 20 more light water reactors, and India will cooperate with Russia in building Russian-designed nuclear power plants in third countries. In addition, the two countries are cooperating in uranium mining, production of nuclear fuel, and waste management. It is also reported that Russia has offered up to a 30% discount on each of the $2 billion VVER 1000 nuclear power plants that it would like to build in India. India also has had technical discussions with three major reactor suppliers, and that is Areva, which is France, GE Hitachi, and Westinghouse Electric Corporation for the supply of power reactors. With regard to safeguards, in Pakistan, there are 9 facilities under safeguards, 15 in India. Of all 9 were inspected by the IAEA in 2020, and 14 of the 15 facilities were inspected in India. The total number of inspections in Pakistan were 37, in India 56. The cost to the IAEA of inspections in Pakistan amounted to 1.7 million euros roughly, and in India about 3.8 million euros. So that was a brief introduction as to where the two countries are with respect to their nuclear power programs in a very general sense. So as I mentioned, from the very beginning of the age of nuclear technology in the 1940s, it was understood that transfers of nuclear technology and materials would need to be controlled to prevent the further proliferation of nuclear weapons. Some of the early attempts to prevent nuclear proliferation, such as the UN Atomic Energy Commission and the Baruch Plan, relied on policies of denying access to nuclear materials and technology. However, after the initial nuclear proliferation by the United States in 1945, followed by the Soviet Union in 1949, and then by the United Kingdom in 1952, it became clear that the policy of secrecy and denial would not work, and a new system would be needed to utilize the myriad benefits of nuclear energy while ensuring that its use remained exclusively peaceful. This led to the Atoms for Peace proposal by President Eisenhower of the United States at the United Nations in December 1953 to set up an International Atomic Energy Agency, which was eventually established in 1957. So as was already mentioned, and I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more, export controls were formalized in the 1968 Non-Proliferation Treaty, which entered into force in March 1970. And it required its non-nuclear weapon states parties, rather all states parties, to supply only nuclear material to non-nuclear weapon states under IAEA NPT safeguards. And therefore, under the chairmanship of a Swiss scientist, Claude Zanger, a committee was set up to develop a list of nuclear materials whose export to non-nuclear weapon states would require, i.e. trigger, IAEA NPT safeguards as required by Article 3.2 of the NPT. And therefore, the mandate of the Zanger Committee was to define what items would be covered under the term EDP, nuclear materials especially designed and prepared. There was no definition at that time for safeguards purposes. So that really was the purpose of the Zanger Committee. And therefore, in defining EDP, it came up with this so-called trigger list of nuclear items that would require safeguards when transferred to non-nuclear weapon states. So these understandings of the Zanger Committee were first published in September 1974 as IAEA document IMSRC 2009, which is regularly updated, and one can find it on the IAEA's website. To be clear, unlike the Nuclear Supplies Group, from the very beginning, the Zanger Committee required NPT IAEA or full scope safeguards on the export of trigger list items to non-nuclear weapon states in accordance with the NPT. So unlike the NSG, the Zanger Committee has had and continues to have a direct link to NPT export controls as required by Article 3.2 and Article 3, I should say, in general. And because of the IAEA's responsibility to implement IAEA safeguards. This is something that is unfortunately not well understood by many states. And this relationship between the Zanger Committee and the NSG really needs to be explained to them. Again, as was explained, And I just wanted to go back a little bit more. Under the U.S. Atoms for Peace program, under which Soviet equivalent nuclear technology for peaceful applications were both IAEA and national U.S. and Soviet safeguards. In May 1974, India detonated a so-called peaceful nuclear explosive device using plutonium derived from a Canadian-supplied research reactor, which was modeled on the NRX plutonium production reactor in Canada. Both Canada and the United States considered India's action to be in clear violation of its peaceful use commitments, and thus they took the lead with the support of France, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union to set up a group of nuclear exporters known as the London Club. And this included France and Japan, which at that time were not parties to the NPT. And the purpose of the London Club was to regulate the export of both nuclear materials and technologies, and also, as I mentioned, to include these two non-NPT states. And again, as Dr. Rizwana mentioned, in 1975, these 7 countries reached agreement on the list of items that would require safeguards, and this is regularly published by the IAEA under IMSRC 254, which again you can find on the website. So the purpose of the London Suppliers Group ostensibly was to prevent other states from using peaceful technologies for nuclear weapons, and also to prevent India from illegally copying the Canadian-supplied CANDU heavy water power reactor, the Rajasthan units 1 and 2. But as I mentioned already, this was not successful, and India went on to commission and operate 19 pressurized heavy water reactors based on the CANDU design. RAP-1 was 100 megawatts electric, RAP-2 200 megawatts electric, and India currently has 3 additional PHWRs under construction. As I mentioned, all 22 pressurized heavy water reactors are illegal copies, even though India has now, using its indigenous technology, uprated these PHWRs to output between 220 to 700 megawatts electric. In 1994, following the Iraqi experience of 1991, the NSG adopted a non-proliferation principle, whereby a supplier, notwithstanding other provisions in the NSG guidelines, should authorize a transfer only when satisfied that the transfer would not contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. In 1995, NPT states in the review conference, I'll just switch off my timer, required the principle of full scope safeguards as a condition of supply. One item that has not been discussed but is important, and we need to pay some attention to it, is the nuclear power plant exporters' principles of conduct that were agreed in 2012. It's the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace worked behind the scenes with a number of nuclear power reactor manufacturers and came up with these so-called principles of conduct. These principles supposedly create common standards of practice in areas of safety, security, non-proliferation, environmental protection, ethics and corruption, and liability insurance. And it includes the non-proliferation principle in conformity with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NSG, relevant Security Council resolutions, and the additional protocol. And the companies that are involved and have subscribed to these principles of nuclear power plant exporters' principles of conduct are Ariba, Cheema, which is a Ariba-Mitsubishi joint venture, Atomstroy Export of Russia, CANDU Energy, the Canadian supplier, GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy, Hitachi GE Nuclear Energy, Korea Electric Power Company, KEPCO, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Toshiba, and Westinghouse. Thus, all nuclear power reactor manufacturers, except for China National Nuclear Corporation, supposedly subscribe to these nuclear power reactor principles. So my point is that even if Pakistan were to get membership in the Nuclear Suppliers Group, it does not assure that Pakistan would be able to benefit from accessing nuclear materials and technology, because the Nuclear Suppliers Group only agrees on the guidelines, and each of the participating governments in making decisions to export has to rely on its national export regulations, and therefore each country is sovereign in its own right to use any criteria, political or otherwise, to grant or to deny exports to a recipient country even if it's a member of the nuclear supplies group. And several years ago, I forget the date, they also came up with this concept of the principle of presumption for not members or subscribing parties to the nuclear supplies group. Another complication is UN Security Council Resolution 1540, and from the introduction, I understand that Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder is one of the guilty parties with this as well. I'm joking, but the problem with this is it was instrumental use of the Security Council bypassing multilateral negotiating criteria to impose certain criteria on all states under Chapter 7. And it should be clarified that Resolution 1540 applies only to prevent the supply or accessibility of weapons of mass destruction components and materials to non-state actors. And very briefly, let me quote you. I attended the meetings of the Security Council. I happened to be in New York, and I heard all the statements made on the 22nd of April 2004 and on the day the resolution was adopted on the 28th of April 2004. And I wanted to very quickly quote you a couple of items from one single statement. It said that the general view expressed in the Council's open debate is that the Security Council cannot legislate for the world. The sponsors have assured the Council that this resolution is designed to address a gap in international law to address the risk of terrorists and non-state actors in acquiring or developing weapons of mass destruction. It does not seek to prescribe specific legislation, which is left to national action by states. The United Nations membership, the general view of the UN membership is that the Security Council cannot assume the stewardship of global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament issues. The Council is not a representative body. And the goal of preventing WMD proliferation by non-state actors and also by states can best be addressed in universal non-discriminatory forums. And we hope that negotiations to elaborate international treaties on these issues can be initiated and concluded as soon as possible. This statement was made by the ambassador, who today is also the ambassador of Pakistan to the United Nations in New York, and that is Ambassador Munir Akram. And perhaps Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder might recall some of these provisions. So I fully agree with what Pakistan stated in April 2004. And actually, all of the sponsoring states, if you look at the repertoire of the Security Council for that month, they all stated that 1540 is to prevent access to non-state actors. But since that time, there has been mission creep, and 1540 has assumed the sort of mandate of requiring broad export controls. So finally, my point is that since we have the Chemical Weapons Convention, which requires export controls, 193 countries are party to it. The Non-Proliferation Treaty has 191 states party to it. And both of these treaties require export controls. So we do not need extra legal entities like the Australia group or the Nuclear Supplies group to intervene and to have intervening mechanism. And that we should work for a broadly based, multilaterally negotiated treaty, which all states, whether they are parties to treaties such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty or not, can contribute to having a holistic regime. I have other comments, but I will refrain from those until we get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tariq, for an excellent presentation. Haris?
Haris, are you listening? No, no, sir. Your voice is not hearing. Hello. No, sir. No, sir. Still not get your voice.
You got to unmute yourself.
So you have two questions in the Q&A box, Haris?
Hello, Haris. Haris, please, if possible, to rejoin the meeting. Your voice is not. No, no, no.
So while Harris is getting online, there's a question to Dr. Rizwana, which says, besides India, what hurdles exist in Pakistan's entry into the nuclear supplies group? This is from Zafar Yousafzai, Senior Research Associate at SVI. So Rizwana, over to you.
I think the fundamental reason is, I would say, political. So currently we know that, and of course we have seen from the outset that international system basically operates on realist guided patterns and criteria. So of course, the global powers that basically regulate the group are the basically supplier states that basically possess technology, know-how, and the material. So it is actually totally their discretion, and it is their decision whether they want to, adopt a sort of rule-based criteria in order to maintain global, normative system and maintain the legitimacy and stability of the regime, or they want to modify and amend the rules as per their own needs. And of course, if they continue to regulate and amend the rules as per their own aspiration and needs in order to meet their political gains and gain legitimacy of, in the particular regions to project their power, that will definitely then destabilize the global rule-based construct. And when this actually destabilize the global rule-based construct, then of course it will lead to encourage more and more countries to follow the suit. So for Pakistan, I think from the outset, as I said, that Pakistan's nuclear weapon program is quite comprehensive. It is only to meet its national security demands, and it aims at achieving no goals other than national security, or its aspirations do not go beyond regions, or are sort of projecting power within the region or beyond the region. So Pakistan's case is consistent and clear. One, Pakistan wants to, become part of this group in order to, acquire nuclear technology for socio-economic growth and for, research and development purposes. Secondly, Pakistan's security construct, national security and safety mechanism has been appreciated by the international institution, and Pakistan is closely working with the international, institutions, for example, the IAEA. And thirdly, I would say that Pakistan has also voiced its case loudly, globally, as to how it basically aspires and wants to become a part of this group. And then, of course, security demands and national power growth on the one hand, and then, of course, national security program on the other hand are consistent and clear to the international community. I believe and I say that there is no hurdle other than political. So this is just the political decision, because they are quite tilted towards India because of their role that they are playing to legitimize United States mobility in Asia Pacific region against China. So I think we, on the other hand, are getting quite closer to China, and the international community believes that we are basically, legitimizing probably China's, access to Indian Ocean region. So if you actually look at it in the broader context, I would again say that it is only political, nothing more than that.
Haris, are you active?
I'm audible? Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, Haris, you are audible now.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. I don't know which question is responded by Dr. Rizwana Abbasi. So I will go with the next question. The question is from Ms. Anam Khan, a visiting research fellow at the SVI. The question addressed to Dr. Tariq Rauf. What else can Pakistan offer to get entry into the NSG, and why is not Pakistan applying in other export control regimes as yet? What should be the policy roadmap for Pakistan? Dr. Tariq Rauf.
So thank you for that question. my position is that try to explain that even if Pakistan were to get membership in the nuclear suppliers group, that does not mean in any way that fuels or other nuclear technologies to Pakistan for a variety of political reasons that Dr. Rizwana just explained very well in her previous intervention. So from my point of view, Pakistan, I think, should not waste its time and energy knocking on the door as a supplicant for the nuclear suppliers group. As Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder mentioned, Pakistan supposedly can manufacture some items. These can be put on the market subject to Pakistan's national export control regulations. That's the way to get attention, is to put items on the market, find customers for items that Pakistan can supply, and then there will be notice given to Pakistan. At the moment, I talked to many people. There is very little support for Pakistan getting membership in the NSG, again, as described by Dr. Rizwana. So, as I pointed out, and I would like Ambassador Hyder, if you would like to add to this, why is there this expectation that if and when Pakistan becomes a participating government in the NSG, countries other than China will be willing to supply nuclear items to Pakistan, and how this would happen? I also wanted to add a couple of other items related to this, which is that as Dr. Rizwana pointed out, the NSG exemption actually is facilitating India's nuclear weapon program. So to answer the question put to me, I think Pakistan could devote its energies better by explaining and publicizing even more the gaps in India's commitments that it has undertaken pursuant to its nuclear cooperation agreement with the United States, and the assurances that it gave to the nuclear suppliers group vis-a-vis its not quote-unquote non-proliferation credentials, and also to counter this narrative that Pakistan has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal, whereas in reality, the fastest growing developments in ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons in the South Asian region is actually being carried out by India and not by Pakistan.
Hello, Haris, are you listening?
Can you hear me? There's a question.
Yes. Yes, Haris, please speak.
There is another question from Ms. Sherbano, who is a research affiliate at the SVI. Whatever one makes of NSG's technical and political aspects, the decision making will always be political. Pakistan still has not been able to get the NSG membership despite having better credentials than India. Should Pakistan still continue its diplomatic efforts despite the biasness of this approach? She has not identified any speaker, so anyone from the panelists can respond to this question.
So I think I already covered these aspects in my reply just now. Unless she would like to ask something supplementary.
Maybe Dr. Rizwana can answer the question.
Please go ahead.
You want the question to be asked again?
Do you want me to raise a question?
Yeah, you want to answer?
I've asked to answer one question, but I don't see anybody allowing me.
Haris, can you ask the question again?
Sure. The question is from Ms. Sherbano, research affiliate at the SVI. Whatever one makes of the NSG technical and political aspects, the decision making will always be political. Pakistan still has not been able to get the NSG membership despite having better credentials than India. Should Pakistan still continue its diplomatic efforts despite the biasness of this approach?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Dr. Tariq Rauf. He has covered ground on this a bit. I think instead of focusing more on, mainstreaming itself or convincing the political group in order to get access to the international market, of course, diplomacy an important element on, this aspect. Side by side, Pakistan should focus more on strengthening its economy, focus more indigenizing its industry, and of course, probably look towards Asia, thereby connecting its economy and industry to the Asian countries and economies. So probably at this stage, wasting or looking at this aspect through one particular lens would have, would be counterproductive. So we have seen, our outputs in the case of FATF. So we failed to convince them. We are still, we persist still in the gray list. So that shows and clarifies that this is all the political aspects that pressurize Pakistan in the present international order. So at this stage, I think I would just simply say that Pakistan should go beyond and look beyond the West.
Okay. There is another question from Ms. Anam Khan, visiting research fellow at the SVI. She has asked a question to Sir Tariq. I don't know, it's Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder or Dr. Tariq Rauf. But the question is that whom do you think will be ready to buy Pakistan-based technology? Any states or companies you could name? Can you trigger a made in Pakistan campaign like India? I think the question is more inclined towards Dr. Tariq Rauf.
So Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder was on the phone, so let me pick up. So in the paper that Ambassador Hyder referred to, which he delivered at the European Union Non-Proliferation Conference in 2016, in that paper, in the annex, he specifies a whole list of items that Pakistan says that it can manufacture in the nuclear technology area. And also speaking to some other people in Pakistan whom I don't want to identify publicly, but who know, the items that Pakistan can make primarily relate to fuel bundles for the Karachi reactor. Because once the Khanum 1 plant was cut off after the Indian nuclear explosion, Pakistan was under pressure domestically to keep this plant running. And it's to Pakistan's credit that despite the sanctions and the cutoff of supply of fuel to Khanum 1, Pakistan was able to continuously supply indigenously manufactured fuel for that reactor. So most of the expertise in fuel fabrication in Pakistan is for the CANDU reactor, but there are very few countries that operate CANDU reactors, so there really is no market for that. But in Ambassador Hyder's paper, he also listed other components that generically are for the nuclear fuel cycle, and perhaps he could elaborate a little bit more and offer that on the market. But that's a good question. Who are the potential customers? And it's very difficult to find potential customers from the 31 countries that are currently using nuclear power. There are some newcomer countries like Bangladesh and Turkey, but they are buying Russian power plants. And again, that's an area where Pakistan doesn't have much expertise. So in that sense, Pakistan really is in a position with its back to the wall. And again, I reiterate that Pakistan is not going to get NSG membership. It's just a fact of life. The world is not fair. There's no point crying about it. There's no point being upset about it. It's the same as with the FATF. Pakistan will be kept in the dock. And so from my point of view, grow up, recognize this, and move on. And stop complaining that one is being treated in an unfair manner. The world is unfair. And Pakistan, through a lot of its history, has coped with such unfairness. And therefore, it can continue its diplomatic effort for the NSG, but, not really focus too much effort. And speaking to some people, when I complained to them that while Pakistan was so focused on the NSG, India smuggled its way into the Australia group, the MTCR and the Wassenaar arrangement, and the Australia group. And the reply given to me was that, oh, well, Pakistan felt that it did not fulfill the criteria for joining those other export control regimes. And again, perhaps Ambassador Hyder could comment on this as well.
Yes, perhaps I could speak now. In fact, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sure.
In fact, Tariq, when you earlier on said who will sell you reactors, I wanted then to I then wanted to reply, but I think the moderator didn't see my raised hand. Anyhow, the point is, if you allow me to disagree, I think a lot of the questions about who will sell you reactors or other items, including, for instance, safety equipment, etc., which should be outside the, which should be one of the NSG exceptions, but we still have problems with. I think that if you have the money, people will give you the reactors. I think that's a simple thing. It's, you know, right now we have, well, of course, even if you have the money, people who are selling reactors are putting up credits and things like that. But if we were liquid, we would have a better chance of buying them. So I'm not sure that I totally agree with you there. Secondly, in terms of joining the, why we haven't or why we didn't join the other or try to join the other export control regimes. Look at our statements for the last 7-8 years. It was always that we're interested in all the export control regimes and we fulfill the conditions of them. And every time we meet, the first time we met the Australia group, we said that. The MTCR we've met numerous times, and we told them in 2005 that we want to join them, at least in our meeting, etc. I think there, again, I didn't want to, you know, take up other people's times. When this question was asked, I replied on the screen that we missed the bus. I mean, yeah, that's the point. I don't think it's because we didn't fulfill the criteria, especially on the MTCR, etc. We just missed the bus. It was an error of judgment. We should have put in our effort. I have always said that the Americans will try to put the India into the other control regimes, and the first was the MTCR, as a kind of soft landing into the NSG, that look, they've done it into this, they deserve it into that. So I think there we just have to blame ourselves. You don't have to blame that we didn't do enough or we weren't qualified. That's just an excuse. I think ex post facto. The fact is that we should have focused on it. There were suggestions that we focus on it, and we didn't do that. I mean, that's really it. Oh, sorry. And the last thing is about what can we export. Yeah, there was this list that I put there in that article, but I mean, look at it this way. We are producing significant parts of the various reactors that we get from China ourselves. And therefore we have an expertise. We have heavy equipment and construction things as well. And so my idea was that when you're having reactors built, for instance, the best case was in the UAE with the South Koreans, we should have told the UAE that, look, we can send at least our engineers and our construction people and our technicians, just as we did, you know, in the 70s after we learned from the Russian steel mill. We sent all our people abroad to help in their industrial development. We could have done that on the nuclear side. We can still do that on the nuclear side. And in terms of reactors, certainly we can make research reactors. And they have been, I think in years past, there were a number of countries who wanted to buy our research reactors, including Jordan. But anyhow, for one reason or another, we were not able to fulfill that, or they were not able to withstand the pressure against the building such reactors, so it didn't go forward. So we have capability. And I'm sure since I wrote that, and since now the capabilities have developed. Yeah, so that's for me then.
So can I come back and challenge Ambassador Hyder a little bit? Even if, as he said, even if Pakistan had money, the reactor manufacturers would beat a path to Pakistan's door, so to speak. I doubt very much that Russia would jeopardize its market in India and its long-standing relationship with India by selling 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 reactors at most to Pakistan. That's all Pakistan could afford. As for sending engineers to the UAE, that's not how reactors are built. just as when the reactors are being built in Pakistan, you either have Chinese labor or Pakistani labor. We don't get labor from other countries that may have expertise in making reactors. So KEPCO, electric company 1 and its KEPCO workers that were constructing the reactors with some input from the UAE using Emirati workers. And I know a number of people who are involved with the Emirati nuclear program, and they have a very strong policy of indigenization. The foreigners working in the nuclear program mainly are lawyers, and the regulator is a non-Emirati, but they will transition to an Emirati regulator sooner or later. Turkey is building reactors. So Russia is the only country at the moment, other than China, that will do this BOO business: build, own, and operate the reactor, and then you pay off the reactor through the electricity that it generates over the next 20 years or so. And I don't know whether Pakistan has offered this, but given this warming of relations between Islamabad and Moscow, whether that would be an option. But again, as I mentioned, India is a big customer of Russia, both for conventional weapons, cooperation in hypersonic weapons. It's a big buyer of Russian reactors. So I don't see any other sellers. I don't see Ariba. They only sell 1,600 megawatt European pressurized reactors, which Pakistan doesn't have the grid to operate, even if it were able to get it, which I doubt that it would. GE and Westinghouse are out of business. The US has not made a new reactor from the ground up for years. The 2 reactors that are coming online were already started 10 years ago. And so GE has been bought out by Hitachi, and Westinghouse has been bought out by Toshiba. But again, there are no customers for GE, Hitachi, and Toshiba Westinghouse. So the only 2 countries that are exporting reactors are Russia and China. And we don't know whether somebody would come and buy Korean reactors if somebody were to open up bids again. So I come back to the point that there is no real benefit in Pakistan expending diplomatic capital for the NSG. It just makes Pakistan look like a supplicant. I think it's insulting for Pakistan's diplomats to camp outside NSG meetings wherever they are held. You know, they camp near in a hotel, they try to give briefings. In the past, this might have had some effect, but I think the utility of that has run its course, and now Pakistan should keep its head high and move on and forget about this, because as I mentioned, even if NSG membership comes, the taps will not be open for a variety of reasons. And all of these things are always political. And again, I keep on repeating over and over again, the world is not fair. The world does not owe Pakistan anything. Pakistan needs to grab things that it needs to get for itself.
Well, Ted, may I just finish? I won't say any more after this, but replying to your thing for the second and I think last time, as far as this webinar is concerned, we talked about Russia being the only alternative source and would they jeopardize their relations with India. Their relationship with Russia with India, of course, is primary and predominant, and I don't think they would jeopardize it, but they like to keep a certain amount of, I wouldn't say balance, but some sort of relationship with Pakistan, especially as India has moved so much towards America. And in one of these EU seminars, perhaps you were not at that one or you were not there at the panel, I was challenging the Russian speaker, saying that, look, you're giving India nuclear submarines, which is your NPT obligations to give weapons of mass destruction delivery capabilities and the technology. And he said, yes, but for instance, the engines on your F-17 collaboration with Chinese planes, your frontline planes can also carry nuclear weapons, and the engines are from Russia. They were from Russia, they are from Russia, they will continue to be from Russia. So it's not exactly that we are totally not getting anything from Russia in terms of military technology or other technology. So, and as far as KEPCO is concerned, even when I was there, they were interested in looking at it, and they said it all depends on the Americans. If they if they don't have, at that time they said if they don't have sanctions on you, later on they said if there was the NSG, we would be interested. And they sent a delegation in 2006 to meet our Atomic Energy Commission. They gave seminars out here and Parliament for that. So I don't think things are totally closed. As far as we shouldn't expend diplomatic capital, well, one can say that about many things, but the point is there's hardly any. I mean, it's when you have a diplomatic presence, you have diplomats, you have they're not 24 hours a day that they can't put in a certain amount of time on the energy issue. Highlights the fact that we are a nuclear power, that we are a nuclear capable country. We have a big civil nuclear program, and we feel that we should join it. It'll be good for the NSG and for us. And rejecting that, I don't think is somehow basement or putting our head low in that case. I think that's also a counsel of despair. It's going from one extreme to the other. We shouldn't be a Greek chorus lamenting that, but we shouldn't either give up and say that no, this is something which is abasing us either. I think that maybe I think there's always a middle road. So I think the middle road is I think worth following. Well, thank you very much. And I enjoyed your
okay, so let me come back, Tariq. The JF-17 fighter no longer has Russian engines. The Chinese now want Chinese engines in them. So the newer models, the Block 3 or whatever they're called, all have Chinese engines on them. And as for KEPCO, its reactors, these 22 reactors are built under license because the intellectual property rights holder is the US. And in order to supply the UAE, it had to get permission from the US, and the UAE, in order to get the reactors, as you know, had to renounce its rights under the NPT to do enrichment and reprocessing. So it enacted a nuclear policy in which the UAE said that even though it has the right to do enrichment and reprocessing, it will not do so, and it will rely on the international market for its nuclear fuel. And
which the Saudis are not accepting. And they might go American.
Yeah, the Saudis may not accept, but that was what the UAE had to do to get KEPCO reactors. So the South Koreans are not free to sell their reactors to anyone. They need to get prior permission because it's American licensed technology. It's not Korean technology. What the Koreans were very clever in doing was to get expertise in modular construction. So each of their 22 reactors is a carbon copy of the other reactors, which is why they are able to build these 4 reactors in the UAE at a cost much cheaper than any of the other providers, and also pretty much in record time. The UAE program is, I think, only about 12 to 14 months behind schedule, which is quite amazing given nuclear reactor construction. Anyway, Tariq, I'm just discussing this with you for the benefit of our audience, which I think is what Dr. Zafar would like, to have an interesting discussion with different points of view. So that's what I'm trying to do here.
No, I agree. I value your questions. I just thought since you asked them, you might like another point of view as well. That's all.
Are there any more questions?
We have 3 more questions.
Okay.
The next question is from Ms. Adila Ahmed, research fellow at Pakistan Institute of Conflict Studies. The question is addressed to Dr. Rizwana Abbasi. Can you please enlighten us? As per my little knowledge, out of 48, 41 members are with India, while China, Ireland, New Zealand, Austria, Turkey, South Africa have objections to this expansionism and instance on development of uniform criteria for the entry of all non-PT nuclear states. How you view that, Dr. Rizwana Abbasi?
Thank you very much, Haris. I think we have debated that quite a lot for some time. I have been writing extensively on the subject, and there is a lot of literature that I have produced on the subject available online, which can be accessed in detail. For criteria, as we highlight, and we believe that both India and Pakistan, and of course all the non-NPT countries, should be accommodated on equal basis based on is criteria that actually is not as highlighted by Ahyousha, not that does not accommodate one against the other. Secondly, I think I would say that question goes even beyond non-NPT countries. As I highlighted, in the 21st century, there are nuclear power programs. So again, of course, there was a study, which I conducted and published by SVI in their recent book, in which I highlighted that at least 41 countries, developing countries in Asia, are planning on and working on, instituting their nuclear, power programs. So NSG in current, environment and new realities basically demand revisions in the NSG's guidelines. So question is not only accommodating non-NPT states, question is accommodating all the new aspirant countries that are aiming at acquiring nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. When questions come to NPT countries, of course, they will have to abide by the rules and finalize a criteria. If they go only one country in order to meet their own demands and political goals against the other, that will globally not only destabilize global existing normative mechanism, rule-based criteria, but also it will create mistrust between and among states. And that mistrust then will lead to create ripple effects in terms of creating asymmetries, creating more arms race problems, shrinking space for dialogue and negotiations, and creating more space and probability of war. So that is there. So then, of course, when we talk about crafting a new criteria, I think I have written that quite extensively as to how the international community and the 48 countries that basically are group members should consider and craft a new criteria. In that new criteria, of course, CTBT is one particular element where both India and Pakistan are, of course, on voluntary ground of, following the moratorium, but Pakistan is the country that proposed, bilaterally India to sign onto this, to craft a mechanism to, bilaterally, in the future follow the, moratorium on criteria-based approach. Secondly, of course, Pakistan is the country that proposed India to, sign on the restraint regime. India declined on Pakistan this particular offer. And furthermore, of course, as Tariq, Osman, Hyder highlighted, that India's 8 nuclear reactors are under a question mark. India has, adopted a silent question on FMCT. India is under a question mark on the additional protocol. India's nuclear power plants are not separated. So these all are the actually questions that need to be addressed carefully. And question goes to the, of course, 48 member countries. Nobody talks about, uranium, stolen cases in India. Of course, it is natural uranium, not enriched, but it leads to then of course, raise a set of questions whether there is a black market that exists globally, which is operating, or that is linked to India, so on and so forth. So these all are the questions that need to be carefully addressed. And in the backdrop of these questions, then there is need to craft a new mechanism. So all the countries' demands and needs need to be carefully assessed. When questions come to, understanding and observing and investigating the safety and security mechanisms, then again, of course, Pakistan case, international community, as I highlighted earlier, itself appreciates that Pakistan follows standards. What about India then? What sort of mechanism is being implemented in India? So these are the questions that need to be really carefully crafted. So criteria, again, it is up to the 48 countries group members. What sort of criteria suits them? What sort of criteria they want to adopt in order to accommodate one, non-NPT member states. Secondly, the new aspirant countries that aspire, in the future, environment to acquire nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I ask one last question, Dr. Cheema? Because we are running short of time.
Please do that.
Sure. The question is from Ms. Amber Afreen Abed. She's a research associate at the SVI. How do the political and diplomatic support of Russia as a regional power for Pakistan in the NSG, as relations between the two states are converging? Also, would Russia export nuclear technology reactors to Pakistan outside of the NSG framework? She has not identified the speaker to whom the question is addressed. So anyone from the panel can respond to this question.
I think I would like Dr. Tariq Rauf to apprise us on that. It is an important question. For me, I think Russia can only block and help us, block Indian entry into the NSC, but by no means Russia can help us to secure membership in the nuclear suppliers.
I think that question has been well answered by Tariq before that Russia has a lot of interest in the Indian market for nuclear reactors. So I don't think Russia would like to jeopardize that market and to provide it to Pakistan, to build Pakistan as the alternative source of supplying nuclear reactors. So Russians are not that fool about that. They're not going to do that. I think that question has been well answered.
I would also, can I add a couple of things, Zafar?
Yeah, please.
Also, Russia at the moment is overextended because it already has contracts with a number of countries, and Rosatom will find it challenging to build all these reactors that it is contracting for. At the moment, there are only 3 countries in the world that can build these large calandria, that is Russia, South Korea, and Japan. And Russia wants to make its own calandria. Also, for Russia, Rosatom is a big foreign currency earner. And given all the sanctions that Russia is under from the European Union, from the United States, it has very few sources of earning valuable foreign exchange, and nuclear exports are one of them. So as Ambassador Hyder mentioned, Pakistan at the moment doesn't have bulging pockets to go on the market to buy reactors. It is selling reactors to Turkey on a build, own, operate criterion for political reasons which do not apply to Pakistan. I just wanted to come back to a few points about India and safeguards, because I was very involved with this when I was at the agency. Despite all the, and I am not supporting India's position here. I'm just stating what the facts are. India, like Pakistan, has an item-specific safeguards agreement under which it is up to the state to decide which items or facilities it wants to put under safeguards. So the fact that India has excluded 8 reactors, fast breeders, and so on is within India's right. It's another matter whether or not it promised to do this to the United States under its nuclear cooperation agreement or to the nuclear suppliers group. Also, with regard to Pakistan objecting to the Indian safeguards agreement in 2008, while at that time, that government buckled under American pressure, but in the broader sense, India and Pakistan, despite all their feuding in the IAEA and in the UN, they cooperate on many of these issues. Had Pakistan objected to India's safeguards agreement, Pakistan would have found it very difficult then to have safeguards agreements for Chashma 3 and 4 to be agreed by the Board of Governors, and then for K2 and so on. Also, Pakistan serves on the Board of Governors of the IAEA every so many years. India is a permanent member. Unlike the Security Council, it doesn't have a veto. Permanent members don't have a veto in the Board of Governors. But India would then have blocked Pakistan coming on the Board of Governors. So Pakistan is on the Board of Governors 2 years. It's off for 1 year, and then it's back on for another 2 years. So that Pakistan would have jeopardized as well. So I think we need to recognize that there were other reasons which I think the government at that time didn't understand. So in the end, it turned out to be a good decision that Pakistan kept quiet, because this agreement would have gone through in any case, and the downsides to Pakistan in the longer term and medium term would have been more severe. Also, the additional protocol of India is within India's rights. Its protocol is very much like the additional protocol signed by Russia and China, where India, like these 2 countries, only agrees to provide information on exports to non-nuclear weapon states. The full additional protocol is only for NPT non-nuclear weapon states. So a colleague of mine criticized the Indian additional protocol as a Mickey Mouse protocol, which in fact it is. But India was within its rights to have such a protocol because that's what the Board of Governors protocol can also sign similar protocol or accept everything. It's up to Pakistan. So those are things which, although one can criticize, India was within its rights. And I say this not to support India, but just to make things factually clear. So thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to take part in this webinar.
Tariq, I would like to raise one question. That Pakistan has recently installed a 1,000 megawatt reactor with assistance from China, K2. And Pakistan has also previously built 2 reactors itself indigenously, Khushab 1 and Khushab 2, although their capacities are not as large as possible. Pakistan has economic difficulties, but if those economic difficulties are overcome, what would be the reaction to Pakistan and China collaboratively building nuclear reactors and providing outside?
So Zafar, the Khushab reactors are plutonium production reactors. So those are separate from K2 and the Hualong 1 Chashma 5, which is envisaged. Even for the Chashma reactors, I was told that all of the technical construction was done by the Chinese. The Pakistanis only did the civil construction, the bricks and mortar, but all the technical components were, I'm told, this needs to be verified, was done by the Chinese themselves. So Pakistan really did not get much transfer of technology. And the IAEA Director General, the previous Director General, visited the Chashma facility, as have Deputy Directors General of the IAEA for nuclear energy. And when I discussed with them, this was one thing that they commented, that Pakistan was basically doing the Mazuri work and that the technical work was being done by the Chinese, and there was really very little transfer of technology. It's one thing to read a book, and it's another thing to do the things with your hands. So perhaps Pakistan knows how the reactors operate because they are the operator. And PAEC needs to know the technology to operate the reactor safely. But it's quite another thing to construct the reactor. So I think this again is something for the Pakistani government for subsequent reactors to negotiate that Pakistan should get a bigger share in the construction of the technical parts. So just as all of the cars that you are driving in Pakistan, they're not made in Pakistan, they're basically assembled in Pakistan. All the parts come from outside. So it could be the same thing. The parts come from the supplier and Pakistan helps with the assembly because I don't think Pakistan has the capability to make the high tensile steel and other parts that are needed for reactors and so on. So that's a longer term, sort of a longer term thing for Pakistan to look at.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions?
Sir, there are no questions. I think we should conclude.
Okay, we are profoundly thankful to all the 4 panelists, Dr. Tariq Rauf, who's a distinguished international analyst, Dr. Tariq Osman Hyder, Dr. Ambassador Tariq Osman Hyder, Dr. Rizwana Karim Abbasi, Ahyousha Khan, and of course, Haras deserves the maximum thinking for making this program possible. So all the SVI people who have been supporting technically from the background, we are also thankful to all the people for, I think it is a splendid discussion. Thank you very much, all of you, for finding a time out of your busy schedule. And a big thanks and a big hand for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
Goodbye.